They told me it would just be cleaning, routine maintenance after an incident they described as sacral trauma, which I thought was just priest speak for someone dying in the wrong room, probably an accident, maybe a stroke during evening prayer or a fall on the stairs. But when I arrived at the monastery, the stone hallway leading to the so-called sanctified chamber was flanked by two silent men in Vatican black. No names, no greetings, just a clipboard and a list of 3 rules. Don't touch the relics, don't photograph anything, and never cross the red wax line etched into the floor at the center of the room. And even as they handed me my gloves and the bleach, I had this thudding in my chest like I'd been walked into something that had teeth but hadn't bitten yet, something old and waiting. And maybe I should have turned around right then. I should have lied and said I was sick or that I'd forgotten my ID. But I didn't, because I was broke and curious. And because I'd always been drawn to the places no one talks about in the open, the sealed doors behind incense-thick chapels and the deadbolt archives under the Vatican Library. So I followed their instructions, nodded along as they whispered things about containment thresholds and residual sanctification energies, which sounded ridiculous at the time, like the kind of cryptic warnings meant to impress outsiders. And I pushed open the thick oak doors with the brass cross inlaid at the handle, stepping into a chamber colder than the stone around it had any right to be. And that's when I saw the blood, or what they said was blood, dark, rusted into the floor, pooling in a wide oval in the center of the room, as if something or someone had bled out slowly, reverently, like a ritual had failed or succeeded too well. And I stepped around the red wax line carefully, as told, and began scrubbing in silence, the bristles of the brush barely making a sound on the grooved stone. The bleach barely fizzing at all, and the moment I started, I felt it. That the stain didn't want to go, not because it was old, but because it was part of the floor itself, like the stone had grown around it, fed by it. And the more I scrubbed, the more it felt like I was removing a scab, not a spill like something had scabbed over a wound in the earth, and I was peeling it open with every pass of my hand. And I remember thinking, I should stop. I should just say it's done, fake a photo, leave and never return. But I kept scrubbing, because something beneath the stain caught my eye, not immediately, but gradually, a flicker of something etched into the stone, not scratched, carved, with care and intent. And when I leaned in closer, I saw the edges of a shape. Letters, maybe, but not in any alphabet I recognized at first glance, and I remember tracing it with the tip of the brush, and then with my glove, and finally, against every rule and bit of reason. I took the glove off and felt the groove of the etching with my bare fingers, and it felt warm, not like stone, but like the back of a neck, like something alive. And the moment I touched it, something in the far corner of the chamber clicked, audibly like a latch undone. And one of the candles that I hadn't noticed was lit flickered sideways, as if exhaling, and I whispered the shape I saw aloud without meaning to, not even fully conscious of reading it, just a breath, a sound. Gaddaral. And I swear to God something in the room sighed back, like it had been waiting. Like it knew its name again for the first time in centuries, and I stumbled back from the stain, slipping a little on the bleach and stone, heart pounding so hard I thought I might faint. And I stared at that name burned into the rock, realizing it wasn't written under the blood, it was written in it. And the floor had drunk it up like ink into parchment, and I remembered Rule 3, never cross the wax line. And I looked down and realized, in my trance or fear or mistake, I'd stepped 1 foot over it. Just enough, just barely, and the warmth I felt at my fingertips now tingled up my arm and into my jaw, as if something had climbed inside me through the name. And I heard something from under the floor, not loud, not obvious, just breathing like the stone itself had lungs, shallow and slow, and I backed away, tripping over the edge of the cleaning bucket, knocking it sideways, the bleach hissing as it spilled across the carved name. And that's when the letters began to smoke, not sizzle like reaction, but smoke like parchment catching fire, and the air filled with this acrid, coppery incense smell that made my eyes burn and my throat ache. And then I heard the whisper, clear in Latin, but echoing inside my own skull. You spoke it, and it knows you now. And I ran, full sprint, out of the chamber, leaving everything behind, past the two silent men who didn't blink as I burst through the hallway, sweat pouring, vision flickering. And the last thing I remember as I reached the monastery's exit was the sound of that oak door slamming shut behind me, on its own, and a voice I didn't recognize whispering from somewhere impossibly close to my ear. First mouth, first witness. And now it's been 3 days and I haven't slept. Not really, because every time I close my eyes, I see the name carved behind my eyelids, glowing red. And I hear footsteps packing the ceiling of my apartment, even though I live alone. And the mail today had no return address, just a page torn from some Bible older than time, with my name scratched in ink beside, Gadderal. And I keep thinking about that stain, that room, that name. And I wish I had never scrubbed that floor. Wish I had followed the rules. Wish I had never touched the warm stone or opened my mouth. But I did, and now I feel it moving in my dreams, in my bones, as if I didn't just clean something, I freed it. And I don't think it ever wanted to be free, just remembered. I didn't sleep after the monastery. I pretended to convince myself that it was over, that saying the name didn't mean anything, that Vatican marble doesn't remember what's carved into it. But I knew that was a lie because that night, in the fake sleep, I tried to slip into like a mask. I dreamt of the name again. Except in the dream, it wasn't carved into stone. It was under my skin, stretching across my ribs in deep black letters that moved like veins with every breath. And something cold was whispering it from behind me, over and over, but not like it was summoning. It sounded like worship. And when I woke up, drenched in sweat and choking on the name like it was still stuck in my throat, I found that I had written it in my notebook 3 times without memory, once backwards, once in perfect calligraphy, and once in a style that looked older than Latin. Something more primitive, like a name made of bone and ruin, and I should have burned the notebook right then. Should have gone to a church, any church, and begged for cleansing or silence or anything. But I didn't, because I wanted to understand, and that was my mistake, the same one every damned soul makes. I believed knowledge would save me, not condemn me. And so I went back to the chapel the next day, not to the blood chamber but the public hall, the one tourists still visit when they want to see gold crosses and faded frescoes. And I sat in the back pew, head down, pretending to pray. But all I was doing was feeling it, listening. And there it was, that vibration in the air, like the name was already sitting in the space between the pillars, humming just beneath the organ drone. And I mouthed it once, silently, lips moving but no sound. And I swear the candle beside the altar fluttered as if a draught passed through. But the doors were sealed, no windows open, no wind. And I waited, heart hammering like I'd knocked on something I wasn't supposed to touch. And then I did it again. This time quieter than breath. Gadderal. And the word was eager, like it wanted to come out, like it belonged to my mouth more than my own name did. And the moment it left my lips, I felt my spine tighten, not in fear, but in something darker, like something had just noticed me, something that wasn't in the room a second before, and the third time. I don't know why I said it a third time. I don't even remember doing it consciously, but it rolled out like a prayer I never meant to learn. And the moment it left my lips, the entire chapel stilled. No echo, no air, even the hum of the lights overhead froze, as if sound itself had been pinned down. And every statue in the hall, the saints and apostles and sorrow-eyed Marys, seemed to shift slightly, just a breath, just enough for me to feel like they were now facing me, and I sat there frozen. Head down, not daring to move because I felt it, pressing down on me like someone had draped wet cloth over my entire body and then whispered between each thread. Now we begin. And something inside my chest knocked. Not my heart, deeper, like a locked room I'd carried all my life had just cracked open. And I couldn't breathe right for the next hour, even after I left, even after I stepped back into the light outside and walked 6 full blocks without looking back, because I knew if I did, I'd see it. See him, or it, or whatever now watched me through veils of architecture and silence. And later that night, the voice returned, but this time not in a dream. Not in a whisper, it came through my bathroom vent, faint and rhythmic like chanting, Gadderal, Gadderal, over and over, and when I leaned close, I swear I heard a second voice responding, not echoing, but answering in a language that hurt to remember, like trying to recall fire by swallowing it. And I should have left the city then, should have packed a bag and vanished into some forest or mountain that hadn't been touched by Roman stone or Christian scripture. But I didn't, because I kept thinking about that moment in the chapel when the air paused for me, as if I'd been seen, chosen even. And I know that sounds mad, but madness is a mirror, and I was already staring into mine when I opened that book in my apartment, the one they told me not to take, the one wrapped in black linen and sealed with 3 wax rings I pretended not to notice. I broke them slowly, like opening a wound, and inside were only names, hundreds of them, handwritten in neat lines, each one separated by thin lines of salt still clinging after centuries, and next to some names. The words spoken once, or sealed in ash, and beside one, mine now, I think, there was only one word in red ink. Listens, and I knew, without needing a priest or scholar to confirm it, that these names were not names at all, but frequencies, not identifiers, but keys, and saying them aloud was like dialing into something that answered if the connection was good enough. And I think mine was too good, because last night, my reflection mouthed the name before I did, and it smiled like it recognized something behind my eyes. And when I ran my fingers through my hair, I found flakes of wax along my scalp, as if someone had pressed a seal there in the dark. And I haven't stopped sweating since, not real sweat, but this cold, damp clinging that smells faintly of myrrh and parchment, like church rot. And sometimes when I close my eyes, I feel like I'm standing at the edge of a spiral staircase leading down into the ground, and someone is calling me from below, not urgently, but expectantly, like a servant returning home. And I keep thinking, what if names aren't words but doors? And what if I just opened one that hadn't been knocked on in centuries? And what if saying it 3 times was the key, like some ritual no one talks about because the people who completed it don't return to explain it? And today, when I checked the voicemail on my phone, there was a message I never recorded, in my own voice, whispering, "He is awake." And I can't stop replaying it because the cadence is wrong. I don't breathe like that, and it ends with a sound like wings folding inward, or lungs collapsing, and I can't go back to the chapel, not now, because I know that if I enter again, the statues won't just look. I think they'll speak, and I'm terrified they'll all speak at once, and I'll understand every word. And if I understand them, I don't think I'll be human anymore. The Vatican doesn't advertise its lower levels. Everyone knows about the catacombs, sanctioned tour for the faithful and curious, the bones of saints lined up in symmetrical reverence. But no one talks about the floor beneath that, the hallway that isn't on blueprints, the corridor behind the bronze gate marked with a Latin phrase no one seems willing to translate aloud. And I never would have found it if I hadn't been following the archivist, the same man who bled through his shirt and cut out his own tongue 3 weeks later. But at the time, he was just a pale figure in white gloves, moving faster than his age should have allowed, muttering things like, "Do not wake the syllables," and "Names are locks, not keys." And I shouldn't have followed him. I should have turned around when the hallway began to slope downward without ever visually appearing to descend, like the architecture had been built to trick perception. And the air changed too. The warm dust of the upper archives was replaced by a cold, electric stillness, as if every stone here remembered screams it wasn't supposed to hear. And when I finally passed through the gate, unlocked, no guard, just open like an invitation, I felt something behind me exhale. Not a person, not an animal, but something old, like stone shifting in sleep. And the chamber was small, circular, lit by a series of humming lamps buried in the ceiling like eyes watching from behind glass. And in the center of the room was a case, a sealed glass tomb the size of a coffin. And I mean that literally. It wasn't just a box. It was shaped like a sarcophagus, smooth edges, no hinges, no seams, just perfectly transparent and buzzing like static. And inside it was a single page, resting on a bed of red cloth, handwritten in something that looked like ash but moved subtly as if stirred by breath. And the symbols were Latin, weren't Hebrew, weren't any script I could name. But my eyes hurt looking at them. not like a headache, but like being stared at too long by something smarter than you, something starving. And I stepped closer, and I swear to God the glass pulled at my breath, like the thing inside was thirsty. And behind the tomb on the wall was an inscription carved deep into the stone, covered in copper patina that looked like dried blood. And I later found out it was written in Proto-Coptic. But I knew, even before translation, what it meant. This name is not to be spoken in any tongue made by God. And I stood there, in that silence that feels like a scream waiting to happen, and I asked myself what kind of manuscript would need to be locked in a casket, buried under silence, beneath faith itself. And that's when I realized it wasn't sealed to protect it from us. It was sealed to protect us from it. And just as that thought sank in, the lights flickered, not all at once, but in sequence, like something was moving along the ceiling, watching, and the humming grew louder. No longer mechanical but vocal, like a chant half swallowed, echoing in my sternum instead of my ears, and I stepped back. But my shadow didn't move the way it should have. It hesitated, lagged behind, as if something else was trying to wear it. And then I heard a knock, not from the walls, not from above, but from inside the glass, and I froze, knees weak, stomach crawling, and I looked again and saw that the ash letters on the page had shifted slightly, as if they'd reorganized themselves while I blinked, now spelling something I shouldn't have been able to read. But I understood it, like it was being translated straight into my blood. And the word was my name, not my full name, not the one on my license or passport, but the one my mother whispered in the dark when I was too young to remember. The name she said only once when I had a fever so bad the priest came to pray over me. And I knew, that the thing inside the tomb knew me not as I am, but as I was and as I would be. And then I heard the sound again, that breathless chant, louder, closer, like it was now inside the room, though I could see no one. And I turned to run, but the gate had closed behind me, not locked, just gone, replaced by smooth wall as if the exit had been a suggestion, and panic rose like bile, because I realized this chamber wasn't built for entry, it was built for containment. And now I had violated it, and I stood there, shivering in sweat that smelled like sulfur and old leather, whispering to myself not to look again, not to read the page, but I did. I looked, and the letters had changed once more, now forming a different name, Gadaral, and I knew that wasn't a coincidence, that whatever I had awakened with my voice had replied with this place, had guided my steps here like a lure, and the air around me buzzed like insects crawling beneath skin. And I closed my eyes and whispered a prayer I hadn't said since childhood, but even as I did, I felt something laugh, not with sound, but with pressure, like gravity turning inward. And when I opened my eyes again, there was something faint in the glass, behind the page, a reflection that didn't belong to me, hunched and winged, faceless but grinning with rows of vertical eyes, and it mimicked me, breath for breath, blink for blink, and then it leaned forward and vanished into the ash like it had dived into the page itself, and the hum stopped instantly, silence slamming down like a stone lid, and I ran, not knowing how I got out, just suddenly standing in the stairwell above, hands bleeding from fingernail crescents, the hallway behind me now bricked up as if it had never been open. And no one believed me when I asked about the glass tomb. Not the clergy, not the archivist before he lost his tongue, not even the guards at the outer gates. But I know it was there. I felt it watching. And now sometimes, when I pass mirrors or polished windows, I see a flicker of ash in my reflection, and my mouth moves half a second after I speak. Whatever was inside, that glass tomb didn't stay there. It followed me out. I was told very clearly, very directly to burn it. No prayer, no ceremony, just fire. And that should have been the end of it. And maybe if I'd done what I was told, I wouldn't be writing this with shaking hands and candlelight smearing shadows across the walls. But the moment I touched the cover, I knew I couldn't destroy it, because the book wasn't dead. It breathed in my hands, not with air, but with weight, like it carried memory, suffering, and something waiting. And I should have recognized the warning for what it was. Not a command, but a test. And I failed, because the book didn't feel like leather. It felt like skin, thick and sun-warped, warm in the center like it remembered being alive. and the threads holding it together were the color of dried blood, not dyed, just bled. And when I unwrapped the cloth that encased it, I smelled something ancient, like incense and teeth, and something newer, like rot kept under floorboards too long, and there were no markings on the cover. Just a burn mark in the shape of a broken circle, etched deep into the flesh, and I hesitated for what felt like hours before opening it. But of course I did, because by then the curiosity had turned to compulsion, and I thought if I read it carefully, if I stayed detached, I could control it. But I was wrong, because the first page was blank, not with absence but refusal, as if it were hiding until I proved myself. And it wasn't until I ran my finger across the margin that the ink began to rise, slowly, painfully, bleeding through from the other side as if the pages themselves wept, and the name appeared. Samiroth, written in a language I don't know how I read but did, and below it, a phrase repeated 3 times. Do not utter, do not utter, do not utter. And I knew that the repetition wasn't for drama, it was reinforcement, it was containment, and I should have closed the book there, buried it, erased my memory of it somehow. But I didn't, because the names on the next pages were worse, or maybe more familiar. Names I'd heard whispered in forbidden texts, apocryphal footnotes, marginalia that theologians pretend don't exist, names that don't belong to angels or demons, but to something else entirely, something older than the garden, older than the fall, names etched into the bone of precreation, and the book didn't stay still. The language shifted with every blink, from Latin to Hebrew, to a script that moved when I wasn't looking at it directly, as if it reacted to my gaze, and sometimes it would pause halfway through changing, and I'd catch sight of something not meant for the human eye, letters with too many lines, symbols that pulsed like wounds, characters shaped like mouths gasping in silent agony. And each name carried a warning beneath it. Last spoken in Pompeii, or unleashed in Aramaic once, 1192 AD, or erased from collective memory by decree of the third pope. And by the time I reached the 6th page, my nose had started bleeding without cause, a slow drip I didn't notice until it smeared across the page and disappeared into the ink like it had been absorbed, like the book drank it, and then something changed. The paper sighed. I swear I heard it, not audibly, but within. Like the book had tasted something it liked, and the ink beneath my blood reformed into a new word, a name I hadn't seen yet. Gadderal, again, always Gadderal. And I remember whispering aloud, "You're in here too." And I shouldn't have spoken because the room grew cold, not ordinary cold, but spiritual cold, like someone had opened a window between worlds and let winter in, and my breath clouded though the radiator was on, and the lights dimmed and then pulsed, once in rhythm with my heartbeat, and I felt watched, not from the room, but from within the book itself. And still, I turned to the 7th page. Because something in me needed to know, needed to see, needed to finish. And the 7th page wasn't like the others. It wasn't handwritten but branded, like fire had written it. And the name, there wasn't a name at all, just a shape that bent the air around it, like a visual scream, and I don't even remember touching it. But when I blinked, my hand was pressed flat against the page, and I couldn't move it, and my skin sank into the paper like it had turned to liquid, and I smelled burning flesh. And I heard something whisper into my jawbone from inside my skull. 7th mouth. Your breath is his now. And when I yanked my hand back, the name had vanished from the page, but not from me. And that night, I dreamt of fire pouring from stone mouths, a choir of voiceless monks chanting in reverse, and a figure wrapped in stitched-together pages walking toward me with a face made entirely of names, none of which I could read except my own. And I woke to find the book closed beside me, even though I had locked it in the kitchen drawer, and my fingerprints were singed into the cover. Blackened, blistered, and I haven't been able to wash the smell from my hands since. Burnt salt and ink, and something that doesn't belong in this world, something like regret made flesh. And I know that every time I opened that book, I wasn't just reading. I was speaking, even without saying a word, because it's not the mouth that opens, it's the mind, and now it's open, and something is looking back. And I can't sleep because I hear the pages turning by themselves, softly, across the room, even though I sealed the book inside a crucifix-bound case under the floorboards, but still. It turns, and every morning I wake up with another name written on the inside of my eyelids, and sometimes my lips move while I sleep, forming syllables I don't remember learning, and I keep thinking, what if every name is a piece of something, like an incantation shattered into thousands of syllables and scattered across centuries? And what if this book was never meant to be read in order, but to be reconstructed, and I'm just one mouth in a line of many, and the seventh page was mine? And if I was the seventh, how many are left? His name was Elias Ferric, a Vatican archivist no one liked to talk about, a man who moved like dust and kept to the lower levels where the air was always damp, and the light always flickered like it was trying to say something. He was the kind of figure you didn't remember until you needed him, until a certain scroll was locked in an iron cabinet, or a book written in ink that faded in sunlight had to be read beneath oil lamp glow. And I never asked why he always wore gloves or why his eyes were yellowed like parchment left in smoke too long. But I remember the day I found him, or maybe it was the day he meant to be found, because he left the door open to the restricted wing. And that never happened, not even during fire drills, and something in me knew it wasn't an accident. And I stepped inside and followed the quiet like it was a thread pulling me deeper into the rot beneath the library. And there he was, slumped over the reading table, one hand clutching a page torn from a codex I didn't recognize, the other still dripping blood onto the tiled floor. And at first I thought it was a heart attack or a stroke, until I saw the knife, old, ceremonial, not sharp but weighted, and the blood smeared across his collar. And then the scream caught in my throat because I saw what was missing, his tongue, sliced out cleanly and laid on the table like an offering beside the page. And yet, his eyes were open, and not dead, not panicked, just watching, like he was waiting for me to arrive. And he held out the page with his trembling hand, and I took it without thinking, because how do you say no to someone who just cut out their soul's anchor? And on that page was a single name, written in graphite that had been pressed so hard the letters had dented through the parchment. Zephariel, not Gadaral, not Samiroth, not any name I'd seen before. And beneath it, in crooked Latin, the phrase lingua devota est, the tongue is offered. And I stared at that name, and for a moment it didn't seem like anything, just a word, dry and inert. But then the floor creaked behind me, and I turned, and there was no one there, but the creaking didn't stop. It circled me, slow, deliberate, like footsteps in spirals, like something walking around me that I couldn't see. And Ferric began weeping, silently, blood still running from his mouth, and he pointed at his own chest, and then at the name again, and that's when I realized. He hadn't written it down to give it to me. He'd written it down to remove it from himself, like purging poison, like amputating infection. And I should have run, I should have dropped the page and never looked back, but I folded it carefully and tucked it into my coat pocket like it was a secret I had to carry. And in that moment, I felt heat flush through my ears, like someone had whispered into them from inside my head, and the whisper was Latin or Hebrew or any language I know, but I understood it somehow. It said, "He spoke too late. You speak too early." And when I turned back to Elias, he had collapsed fully onto the table, and I never saw him again because they sealed the room that night and denied everything, said the records were wrong, that no archivist named Elias Ferric ever worked there. And when I pushed back, they assigned me to surface duties for a week and revoked my archive key. But by then it was too late because I'd already heard it. Zephariel, in my dreams, in the breathing of church bells, in the drip of leaky pipes. And once, during morning mass, when the choir stopped for a beat, and I swear I heard one of the tenors exhale the name like a mistake, and it echoed wrong, like it had weight, like it had presence, and every time I tried to forget it, it found its way back. On the edge of sermons, in old recordings, even in the static of radios I hadn't touched. And worse, I found myself mouthing it unconsciously, again and again, even while I slept. I recorded myself once, left the camera running overnight. And in the early hours of the morning, I saw myself sit up in bed, eyes open, mouth working in silence, and then suddenly whisper, "Zephariel, Zephariel, Zephariel." 3 times, always 3. And when I played the audio back, There was a second voice layered under mine, faint and slow and mirroring me, syllable for syllable, but distorted, like it had been buried in mud. And my nose began to bleed just listening to it. And I knew that whatever Ferric had been trying to silence had now found a new tongue. And I was its next choir member, its next speaker, and the worst part, the part that keeps me up, is that I started to enjoy it. Just a little, because the name gave me access. Doors began to open in the archives that weren't on any maps, vaults I could now enter without keys, rooms that had been sealed since 1643 and now welcomed me like a child returning to its father. And in one of those rooms, I found another page, pinned to a wall with a dagger made of bone, and written on that page was a name I hadn't seen yet, but recognized instantly. Mine. And it was written beneath Zephariel, like a signature. Like I had already agreed to something without knowing it, and next to it, the Latin. Lingua tertii circuli, tongue of the third. That's when I realized this wasn't just a coincidence or a haunting. This was a system, a choir. And every name wasn't just an entity, it was a verse. And every person who spoke it was a singer in something far older than scripture, something trying to reassemble itself in pieces, using human voices like mortar. And I haven't spoken aloud in 3 days now, not once, because I'm terrified the next word out of my mouth will be the wrong one. And I can feel it building behind my teeth like pressure, like an avalanche waiting for the echo of the first shout. And I keep thinking of Ferric, of his eyes as he handed me the page, and how maybe he thought he could stop it by cutting the name from his own mouth. But that's not how it works. Once it knows your voice, it stays. And now I hear it humming beneath every silence, and I wonder, if I scream, will it scream back? Or worse, will it finish the song through me? The door wasn't a door, not at first. It looked like nothing, just a warped portion of wood paneling behind the basilica's third altar, the kind of architectural scar that passes unnoticed for centuries, until one day you lean against it out of exhaustion, and it shifts, not with the creak of hidden hinges, but the soft sigh of something yielding. And when I stumbled through, I felt the temperature drop by 10 degrees instantly, not like stepping into a draft, but like falling into cold memory, into a place the Vatican didn't even catalogue. And I knew this room had not been built, not exactly, more like it had grown, assembled itself slowly from guilt, ritual, and abandonment, because the stairwell behind the panel was crooked and wet, its stones sweating like flesh. And I knew even before I descended that I shouldn't, that I was stepping into something meant to be forgotten. But I couldn't stop, because the air tugged at me like water pulling a drowned man deeper, and as I went lower, the space seemed to bend, the light above me fading faster than it should, until only my phone's flashlight remained, flickering not because the battery was dying, but because it was afraid. And at the bottom of the stairwell was a narrow hall, lined with carved archways and blackened scripture, and I felt it in my gut, in my gums, the pressure of names too close to the surface. And then the corridor opened into a circular room with no lights, no crosses, no signs of sanctity, just walls that were weeping, not water, not blood, but ink, thick and pulsing, dripping in slow threads down the stone like the room itself was remembering every syllable it had ever trapped. And the ink wasn't random. It formed names as it fell, writing them over and over in layered, ancient script. Names I'd seen in the Forbidden Bible, names Ferric had warned me of, names that had haunted my dreams and once whispered themselves through my teeth while I slept. And some of them I recognized instantly. Gadaral, Zephariel, Samyeroth. Names not spoken in sermons, but sealed in rituals, chained in language, wrapped in fire. But others were new or worse, unfinished. The ink sketching letters that twisted mid-fall, shifting between alphabets, resisting interpretation like the names themselves didn't want to be known. And the moment I stepped inside, the door vanished behind me, the panel sliding shut without a sound, and I was alone with the walls and the names and the wet sound of dripping language, and I didn't scream, not yet. Because part of me was mesmerized, transfixed by the rhythm of it all, how each droplet timed itself like a heartbeat, how the names pulsed slightly, as if read by some invisible eye, and then I noticed something worse. One of the names on the far wall was mine, written in fresh black, the ink still warm, still sliding, but instead of running down, it ran up, like it was rising toward something unseen. And when I turned to leave, the room shifted, not in size, but in intent. Like the space had become aware of me, had catalogued me, and now I was no longer a visitor but a subject, and the walls began to tremble just slightly, like breath held too long, and the ink on the floor thickened into puddles, and I saw my reflection in one of them. But it wasn't me, not exactly. It was me with too many teeth, smiling like it had learned how to wear my skin and was just waiting for me to step closer, and the names on the wall began to whisper, not aloud. But inside my mouth, like my tongue was remembering how to pronounce them, and I bit down hard, drew blood, because I knew what would happen if I spoke. I knew what Ferric had tried to stop, and I remembered that phrase. Lingua tertii circuli, the tongue of the third circle, and I wondered if this room was the third circle, if the circles weren't just metaphors, but levels, descending not through stone, but language, each name a rung downward. And I couldn't leave until I found the one name I hadn't yet heard. Because I think that's why the room let me in, because it wanted to show me. And that name wasn't written like the others, not dripped or carved, but burned into the wall, with ash curling at the edges and the stone cracked beneath it, and it said Earthmare, and the moment I read it, the ink stopped all of it, the walls froze, the drips suspended midair, and then the entire room sighed, like something beneath the Vatican had finally been named again, and a hole opened in the floor, silent and round, and I saw only darkness within it, and a single rope ladder descending into what looked like nothingness, and I couldn't help myself. I took a step forward. And the moment my foot touched the edge of that pit, the names all reversed, flowing upward now like they were being withdrawn, pulled back into the stone, as if someone was watching and had decided to close the book again. And I ran, or tried to, but the room didn't let me go, not at first. It held me there just long enough for one of the names to flicker across the wall again. And this time it was mine, next to the name I just read. Earthmare, and underneath the phrase, his voice, his vessel. And I knew then that I hadn't been exploring or uncovering. I had been called, selected, like the room had waited years, centuries, for a voice like mine. And I clawed at the wall, trying to force the hidden door open. And finally, by some mercy or mistake, it gave way and I crawled out into the chapel again, gasping, half-blind, covered in ink that won't wash off. Not fully, not ever. And now every time I close my eyes, I see those dripping walls and the ink spelling my name backward, over and over, and I wonder how long before the name reaches my mouth again. How long before I stop fighting and just speak it. Because I swear, sometimes, I wake up whispering it already. I checked into the hotel under a false name, used cash, disabled my phone's GPS, and chose the room furthest from the elevator, 5th floor, corner suite. Not out of luxury but distance, as if more walls between me and the world could stop whatever had started to follow me. And I thought maybe if I left the basilica behind, left the Vatican, the archive, the bleeding walls and burning names, I could quarantine the infection to stone and scripture. But evil doesn't stay where it's summoned. It remembers who called it. And I realize now I wasn't being followed like a man is followed. I was being carried like an echo in the marrow. And that night the sky over Rome was the wrong color, not dusk, not storm, but bruised, as if God had turned his face away and the light didn't know what to do, and at exactly 2:44 a.m. I heard the knock at my door, not loud, not demanding, but patient, ritualistic. 3 soft taps, too slow. 1 hard, and something in me recognized the rhythm even before I stood, something ancient and afraid. And I approached the door like a child, hearing his name from the woods, slowly, stupidly, my breath held tight in my throat. And when I looked through the peephole, there was nothing, just empty hallway, low hum of flickering lights. But I swear to you, I felt someone standing there, breathing against the other side of the wood. And I didn't open it, not then, not yet. I backed away, paced the room. Lit the old candle I had taken from the archive, the one blessed and blackened, the one Ferric had called a last light, and I whispered prayers in broken Latin that felt like speaking through wet cloth, like something was trying to catch the words before they left my mouth. And then, without warning, my phone buzzed once, screen lit up, call from Sister Alba, and that name sent bile up my throat because Sister Alba was dead, not just dead, but sealed, entombed under glass in the Vatican ossuary after the incident, her tongue burned, her eyes sewn shut with scripture. And yet here she was calling from no number at 3:06 a.m., and I didn't answer, of course I didn't, but the voicemail it left, that thing, it played on its own. Speaker turned on, no prompt, no permission, just her voice, wet and low, whispering a name I had seen only once, scribbled in red on a torn piece of papyrus pinned to the inside cover of the forbidden Bible. Namora, followed by 3 words in Latin I still haven't translated because every attempt makes the text move, like it knows what I'm trying to do, and after the message ended, silence swallowed the room, so loud it pressed into my ears, and when I finally found the courage to check the hallway again, she was there, not in the peephole, not behind glass, but inside, standing in the far corner of the suite like she'd always belonged there, veil soaked with oil, habit scorched at the hem, and her hands clutching a rosary that had melted into her flesh, beads fused to bone, and she didn't speak, not with words. Her mouth moved, slow and wide, as if struggling to pronounce something unspeakable, and in that instant I knew. He was trying to force the name through me, like a vessel, like she had been sent not to kill me, but to use me, and I did the only thing I could. I struck a match and dropped it into the candle, recited the names of saints in reverse, and held the Bible to my chest like a shield. And for a moment, just a moment, she paused, her head tilting as if confused by my resistance. And then her form cracked like plaster over rot, and a sound tore through the room, not a scream, not a voice, more like paper tearing underwater, and her mouth opened wider than bone should allow, revealing a second face inside, eyeless, smiling, made of names. And she lunged, not forward, but into the mirror, disappearing in a flash of wax and soot, and I collapsed, heart spasming, my tongue burned from the inside. And for hours I sat in the corner, waiting for daylight, waiting for anything. And when the sun finally touched the floor, I found the mirror cracked from top to bottom, and on its surface was scrawled the name again, Namora backwards, as if it had been written from the inside out. And now every time I pass a mirror, any mirror, even puddles or polished glass, I see her there, waiting, mouthing something, practicing a name, and I know she isn't done. I know she left something in the room in me, because my voice doesn't match my breath anymore, and sometimes I hear myself speaking when I'm not, and worst of all, last night, in the hotel registry. Someone checked in using my real name, even though I never gave it, and the room they chose was the same one I fled, room 506. And when I asked the front desk who booked it, they shrugged and said, "Sister Alba did, sir," like it was the most normal thing in the world, and they handed me a message with no envelope, no ink, just pressed words burned into the paper. "Do not run. The name knows where you sleep." And I don't think she left. I think she's just waiting for me to speak it aloud. There's a midnight mass the public isn't told about, one not listed on any schedule or bulletin, and it happens deep beneath the Sistine Chapel, below even the crypts, where a narrow passage leads to a chapel carved entirely from black stone, polished to the point where it reflects only shadow. And I only found it because Ferric once told me that music has weight, that certain notes don't echo, they bind, and that every hymn hides a lock. And I remembered that when I was crawling through the lower ventilation corridors, driven by some nightmare echo I couldn't silence, and I heard it, not music, not really, something older, slower, like language stretched into melody, and I followed it down, breath tight in my chest, until I came to a grate above a chamber bathed in candlelight that never flickered, where 12 hooded figures stood in a circle, and in the center was an altar covered in chains, not symbolic ones, but real, iron and etched with names I couldn't read fast enough, and the figures were singing, mouths moving in perfect synchrony, but the sound they produced wasn't choral. It was mechanical, like gears grinding inside flesh, and the pitch vibrated through the stone like it was alive, and I swear the altar pulsed with each verse, rising and falling like a heartbeat, and that's when I saw it. The black book resting on a pedestal behind the altar, chained at its spine, pages turning with each verse, as if responding to the music. And it wasn't paper inside, but something else, something wet, that shimmered like oil and trembled slightly every time a syllable was sung. And suddenly, one of the choir faltered just a moment, a note too high, a syllable misaligned. And in that second the room shivered, candles flaring white, and then extinguishing all at once. And the silence that followed felt like a scream inhaling, and from the organ pipes at the back of the chamber came a low hum, one I recognized because I'd heard it in my own skull. The sound a name makes when it's spoken by something without a mouth. And the monk who had broken the harmony fell to his knees, clutching his face, not in pain, but in rapture, weeping and whispering the same thing over and over. He heard me. He heard me. And then his body began to split, not explode, not burn, but come apart at the seams like cloth unraveling, until all that remained was his robe and a pile of grey ash curling gently as if still breathing. And no one moved, not the others, not the black book, not the altar. And then, slowly, the candles relit themselves one by one, and the choir began again, this time in perfect sync. And I understood then that this wasn't worship, this wasn't praise, this was containment. Each note a link in a chain, each voice a barrier, and that if they ever stopped, if the melody broke, then the thing beneath the altar, the thing they didn't dare name, would remember its shape and rise. And I backed away from the grate, trembling, bile in my throat, every hair on my body standing as if lightning was passing beneath my skin. And I realized this was why the Vatican had kept so many forbidden names locked in silence, because some of them aren't just words, they're locks, and others worse ones. Our keys and the choir wasn't a tradition, it was a sacrifice, a maintenance ritual, and those chosen to sing were no longer entirely themselves. Their mouths moved too smoothly, their eyes glowed faintly, and their skin had the texture of wax melting under a slow flame, and I remembered what Ferric once mumbled in his sleep when I'd been watching over him post-seizure. The ones who sing don't dream anymore. The dreams sing them. And now I think that's what the choir has become, instruments in a song that was never meant to be heard. And I stumbled back to my hotel, covering the mirror in bedsheets, stuffing towels under the door to keep the voices out. But still, when I try to sleep, I hear it, that hum the same frequency as the organ pipes, the same tremor I felt in the blood chamber. And I know something followed me again, something heard me in the walls, and this morning, tucked under my door, was a single page. Torn from a hymnal I didn't own, the page numbered 777 with no music on it, only one name printed in red, Ulfrith, and beneath it the instructions, to be sung only once, never aloud, never alone, and I haven't said it. I haven't even whispered it, but I feel it building in my chest, like a tune I was born to carry, and when I turn the tap in the bathroom sink, it drips in rhythm with the chant. And when I run my fingers across the steam on the mirror, my hand trembles in harmony. And I'm terrified because I don't know if I've already begun humming it in my sleep. And tonight I'm lighting all the candles I own and placing salt under every door, because if I start to sing, I don't know whose voice will come out. And I fear that whatever is bound beneath that altar is listening for me. I've been writing names on the walls, not for study anymore, not for control, but for survival, because if I don't trap them somewhere, I might speak them in my sleep, and I know what happens when that starts. I've seen what's left of the ones who sang in their dreams. So I use charcoal and ash and broken pencils, scratching names into plaster like warding glyphs, a prison of syllables that hum beneath the wallpaper. But the problem now isn't the names I remember. It's the one I'm forgetting, mine, the simplest, most human thing I own, and it's slipping away. It started when I went to sign a delivery receipt and stared at the line for a full 30 seconds before my hand moved, signing something. Wrong, some other signature, looping and sharp, like a cipher I don't recall learning, and I laughed it off at first, until I realized I didn't recognize the sound of my own laughter anymore, like it came from behind me, slightly delayed. And then there was the envelope, the one addressed to me. But the name on the front wasn't mine. It used to be. But now it looked unfamiliar, like a translation of a language that had never existed. And I know how this sounds. I know the signs of unraveling identity, psychological break, fugue state, whatever terms they try to use, But this isn't dissociation, it's replacement. I'm being rewritten slowly, like a book that's still being copied over. But the ink hasn't dried, and I think it started the night I heard the name in the mirror, not spoken, just felt the vibration of it against the glass, against my skin. The way my reflection mouthed something I couldn't hear, but somehow understood. And since then, little things have gone missing. My ID demagnetized and replaced with a blank card. My passport photo faded until my face blurred beyond recognition. My voice recorder filled with files I never made, all titled with variations of names from the forbidden pages. And one of them was just labeled the final speaker. And I know it was my voice on the tape, but it was reciting a name I don't remember learning over and over in a tone so flat and calm it chilled me, because I sounded devoted, like I'd already given in. And I can't sleep in the dark anymore, not because of what's in the shadows, but because I see myself there, walking past mirrors, turning corners just out of view. And it's not me, not quite, just. What's replacing me? I think it's building from the names I've said, the ones I've read, like each syllable chipped away a little more of me and laid down something else in my place. And I thought I was protecting myself by memorizing their names, cataloging, recording. But now I realize that's what they wanted, to be remembered. Because once something is remembered, it lives. And if enough people carry the names, they don't need pages anymore, they use bodies. I don't know how much of me is still original. I've started seeing old photos and not recognizing the face, not because it's changed, but because the memory is gone, like the person who lived that day isn't me anymore. And the name that floats to mind when I try to recall my childhood isn't mine, it's Saltina, a name I saw etched into the wall of the bleeding chamber, written in concentric spirals, and now it's the first thing I think of when I wake, and the last thing before sleep. And the nightmares have turned formal, no longer chaos, but structure, cathedrals with red pulp floors, corridors that whisper names down both ends, and a choir that sings without mouths, just lungs stitched shut and eyes open too wide. And they sing to me, call me by a name I haven't spoken yet, but one I know will be mine soon, unless I find a way to stop it. But how do you stop becoming something when you've already spoken the incantation? I tried to write my full name 3 nights ago, every letter, over and over like a ward. But by the end of the page, the last 4 lines were in script I didn't recognize, and it looked alive, pulsing, the ink wet despite being hours old. And yesterday I found the crucifix above my bed had inverted itself, not twisted, not manually flipped, but grown downward, like it had wept its way into a different shape. And I think whatever watching me now isn't trying to kill me. It's waiting for the name to settle, waiting for my own to be fully forgotten, overwritten by the chain of syllables that started with Gadaral and has now reached deeper, something far older. Something unlisted even in the forbidden books, because I found a page that wasn't there before, tucked into the binding of the Black Bible, blank except for one phrase etched into the margin. The remembered become the spoken become the named become flesh. And I know that's what's happening to me. I'm not being erased, I'm being prepared. And I keep hearing whispers from behind doors that no longer lock, from televisions that aren't plugged in, from mouths that aren't mine, and they don't say my name, they say theirs over and over. And I repeat them silently, not because I want to, but because it's easier than resisting, like a tongue finally relaxing into its new purpose. And tonight, I found something carved into my arm while I slept. 6 letters, black as ink, unreadable in any mirror, and I've stopped trying to wipe it away, because it just returns, deeper, clearer, and I don't think I'll be able to stop it from spreading. I think the next time someone asks me my name, I won't recognize what I say. I didn't learn the final name, I remembered it, as if it had always been there, hiding somewhere between my breath and my bones, and I understand now that the names weren't just syllables. They were scaffolding, layered whispers building toward a structure my body was never meant to house. And each time I spoke one, it wasn't a mistake. It was a step, a rung, a cipher decoding me. And when the last page of the forbidden Bible turned itself, slow and deliberate like a throat opening for a scream, There was no ink on it, no warning, only a mirror surface that reflected not my face, but the absence of it, like something had already eaten away the final outline of who I was. And then, in the silence of that room, I heard it, not with ears, but inside the folds of thought, like a scream folded so deep inside consciousness, it no longer made sound, the final name, not in Latin, not in Enochian or Hebrew or any of the sacred languages. It had no shape, no vowels, no place in the throat. It was carried through me, like a fever dream spoken between pulses. And I don't think I survived the hearing of it, not entirely, because ever since that moment, the world has felt different, unthreaded, reflections no longer match, clocks slip, words slur around me, and birds fall silent when I pass. And I know the Vatican knew that's why they hid it, sealed it beneath song and death and ritual, not because the name could summon something, but because it was the thing. The final name is not a title, not a label, it is the entity itself, encoded in language so pure that to know it is to become its vessel. And I understand now what the phrase, the named become flesh, really meant. It wasn't about bringing them into our world, it was about turning us into them. And I'm not alone anymore, not in my head, not in my blood. It speaks sometimes when I try to dream, showing me cities made of mouths. Endless halls where language burns like fire and time curls inward. And sometimes I see myself walking there, wearing my own face like a mask, whispering names I no longer try to resist. And 2 nights ago, I found myself in the chapel again. But I don't remember going, just waking up kneeling before the sealed altar, hands cut open, bleeding onto the stone. And the monks didn't stop me, they only watched, faces unreadable, their eyes already gone, as if I was just completing what had already begun. And I think that's the true horror, not that I've spoken the name, not that I carry it, but that I was meant to, that this was never about warning or avoidance, but inevitability. And the final name doesn't want worship, it wants echo, to hear itself in new mouths, to divide and multiply and overwrite. And now the sound is everywhere, in the wind through cracked windows, in the white noise between TV channels, in the breath between prayers. And it knows me. I feel it shifting inside, not like possession, but replacement, like a shadow finally stepping out of the corner it's always waited in. And I tried to write it down once, thinking maybe if I externalized it, purged it, I could delay the end. But the pen snapped in my hand. The paper curled and wept, real tears, soaking through my desk until the wood warped and split. And even now, I hear it when I try to speak my own name. It sits just behind the teeth, waiting to slip through, and I want to say it, not because I choose to, but because I've forgotten what it feels like not to be full of it. And I've started seeing others like me, on trains, in crowds, across the street, faces that twitch when certain words are spoken, that flinch when choirs sing, whose lips move in time with mine during sleep. And I wonder how many of us there are now, how far the name has traveled, because it doesn't need books anymore, or churches, or seals. It just needs remembrance, and I understand now why they burned the others, why so many monks vanished without explanation, why the names were banned. Because once the final name is known, it doesn't leave, it roots itself into the host and waits, not to be shouted, but to be believed. And I do now, I believe in it more than I believe in myself. And I know that's the end, not fire, not revelation, but belief, quiet, inevitable belief. And I've stopped fighting. Not out of surrender, but fatigue. I'm too tired to remember who I was before the names. And maybe I never existed at all, maybe that was just the vessel clearing its throat. Because today, someone called out to me on the street using my real name, the one I'd forgotten, and I didn't turn, because it didn't belong to me anymore. And I heard the sound of my own voice say something back, something low and foreign and final, and they collapsed, eyes rolling back, whispering syllables that haven't been heard since before Genesis. And I kept walking, because there's no point hiding anymore, not when the world is already listening. And tonight I will say it aloud, just once, just to see what happens. Maybe the sky will split, maybe nothing. Maybe I'll just disappear, or maybe I already have. And this body is just a recording, a phonograph needle dragging across the grooves of the final name, one last time before the silence swallows us all. And when the name speaks itself through me, I pray no one else is listening.